Hello. I never thought I would sit in front of a camera and say these words out loud, but if you're watching this right now, it's not by accident. There was a time when I lived deep inside darkness, not metaphorically, but spiritually. I was part of a coven, and what I'm about to reveal to you, most people will never believe. But I know what I saw. I know what we feared. Back then, we didn't just perform rituals for control or influence. We targeted people's lives in very specific ways. And one of the most common targets was finances, poverty, debt, constant struggle. It wasn't always bad luck. Sometimes it was spiritual. I remember nights where we would gather just before midnight. That hour, it wasn't random. Midnight is a spiritual crossover point, a time when, according to what we practiced, the veil felt thinner and declarations carried more weight. We weren't afraid of many things, not prayers, not church attendance, not even people who claimed strong faith. But there were certain scriptures, specific ones, that disrupted everything we tried to do. And I need you to hear me carefully. Not all Bible verses affect the spiritual realm the same way. Some comfort, some teach, but a few, very few, carry authority that breaks things instantly. There were three verses hidden in the book of Isaiah that we absolutely avoided encountering. If someone declared them with understanding, with authority, especially at midnight, it caused chaos in what we were doing. I didn't understand it at first. I thought it was coincidence, but over time, pattern after pattern confirmed it. Financial curses we tried to enforce, suddenly breaking. Chains we thought were secured, collapsing. One night changed everything for me. We had been working against someone who had been struggling financially for years. Every attempt we made before had succeeded. Delays, loss, unexpected expenses. It always worked. But that night, something went wrong. Around midnight, everything shifted. The atmosphere changed so violently that even the most experienced among us felt it. It was like something pushed back hard. We stopped the ritual immediately. That never happened. Later, we found out why. That person had started declaring a specific verse from Isaiah, not casually, not weakly, but with boldness, with repetition, right at midnight.
Oftentimes, sure is enjoyed.
It was how quickly it worked. The financial oppression we had carefully layered began to break within days. Opportunities appeared, doors opened. It was like something had been legally reversed in the spiritual realm. That was the first time I realized we weren't as powerful as we thought. The first verse I need to share with you is this. Though I won't just quote it, I need you to understand how it's used. Because the power was never just in reading it, it was in declaring it like a weapon. This verse speaks about breaking yokes, destroying burdens, and removing oppression. But when declared with authority, it doesn't just describe freedom, it enforces it. And that's what terrified us. Because when someone spoke it at midnight, it was like they were stepping into a legal authority we couldn't override. We could influence fear, we could manipulate doubt, but we could not stand against authority that was activated through truth and belief. And most people never activate it. They read quietly, they whisper, they hope.
But hope alone never stopped what we were doing.
Authority did. The second verse was even more dangerous to us because it didn't just break something, it reversed something. Financial curses rely on cycles, loss after loss, delay after delay. It creates a pattern that feels natural, but it's not. This verse disrupted that cycle. When declared, it shifted outcomes. It introduced restoration. It spoke of rebuilding ruins, of things long broken being restored. And when that verse was declared at midnight, it was like time itself was being challenged. We saw people recover financially in ways that didn't make logical sense. Debts cleared, unexpected income, opportunities that shouldn't exist, and we couldn't stop it. That's when fear started to grow, not in them mere months, but in us, because we realized something dangerous. People didn't need to know everything.
They just need to know.
And use it the right way. I didn't leave that night, but something inside me started to crack because for the first time, I wasn't witnessing power flowing from what we were doing. I was witnessing it being overridden completely, effortlessly, and that shook me more than any ritual ever could. You have to understand, in that world, control is everything. Predictability is everything. When you know how to influence outcomes, you begin to believe nothing can interrupt you. But those verses, especially when declared at midnight, they introduced something we couldn't calculate. And that's what made them dangerous. The third verse, the one I'm about to explain, was the one we feared the most. Not because it was loud, not because it was aggressive, but because of what it did, quietly and permanently. This verse speaks about divine provision, about being led, sustained, and satisfied even in dry places. But when someone declares it with authority, it doesn't just describe provision, it activates alignment. And alignment is something no curse can survive. I remember clearly the first time I saw this verse in action. It wasn't dramatic at first. There was no sudden reaction like the previous time, no violent shift in atmosphere. It was calm. Being too calm. We almost dismissed it. But within weeks, everything changed for that person. Not overnight wealth, not instant miracles, but steady, undeniable progress, stability, growth, increase. That's when we realized something terrifying.
Was this verse didn't just break curses.
Verse didn't just break curses.
It prevented them from returning because it established something deeper than temporary freedom. It established order, and once order is restored, chaos loses its entry point. We could no longer create cycles in their finances. Every attempt failed. Every delay we tried to introduce collapsed before it could take root. That's when one of the elders in the coven said something I will never forget. She said, when someone aligns with that level of authority, you don't attack, you retreat. Nice. Unbeaten. That was the moment fear fully entered my heart.
Not fear of what we were doing.
but fear of what we were up against. Because everything we practiced relied on access through fear, through ignorance, through inconsistency. But these declarations, when done correctly, removed access completely. Now listen carefully, because this is where most people get it wrong. It wasn't just about saying the verses.
We had seen many good scripture before. It didn't affect us. It didn't disrupt anything. It was just words.
What made the difference was how it was declared. The timing mattered. Midnight wasn't superstition, it was strategy. It was a moment of transition, a point where spiritual authority could be asserted with clarity. But even more important than timing was conviction.
The people who broke these cycles didn't sound unsure. They didn't repeat the verses like a ritual. They declared them like a verdict.
Like something had already been decided. And that's what changed everything. Because in the spiritual realm, uncertainty creates openings. Extority. Come warn her. Me paint and look the thing. Another mistake people make is inconsistency. They try once, maybe twice, and when nothing happens immediately, they stop. But the people who broke financial oppression, they didn't stop. They were relentless. Midnight after midnight, declaration after declaration, until something shifted. And when it didn't just shift slightly, it broke completely. I remember one case that haunted me for weeks. Millie, a woman we had targeted for years. Her finances were always unstable. Every time she got ahead, something would pull her back. It was predictable, and it wasn't. She started declaring all three verses every night. Same time, same authority. At first, nothing changed. Then suddenly, everything did. Opportunities came from places we never expected. People helped her without reason. Financial doors opened one after another. And we couldn't trace it. We couldn't stop it. We couldn't even slow it down. But it was strange a wall we built for years crumble in silence. That's when I began to question everything. If what we were doing was truly powerful, why could it be undone so completely? Why were we afraid of something so simple? And the answer was something I wasn't ready to accept at the time. Because those verses weren't just words. They lightly corrosion. And truth, when spoken with authority, doesn't negotiate. It enforces him of it enforces. That realization stayed with me. It followed me. It disrupted my thinking every single day. Because deep down, I knew something had shifted.
Moves and just around me.
But inside me, I tried to ignore it. I really did. I went back to the rituals, back to the gatherings, back to pretending nothing had changed. But once you see something real, something undeniable, you can't unsee it. Those verses stayed in my mind like an echo I couldn't silence. And eventually, I stopped resisting. I needed to know why they worked.
Not just from observation, but from truth.
So I did something I was never supposed to do. I opened the Bible not as a tool to study, but as someone searching, and that's when everything began to unravel. The first verse that shook me comes from book of Isaiah 10:27. Isaiah 10:27 The yoke shall be destroyed because of the anointing. When I read it for myself, it hit differently. This wasn't just symbolic language. It was a declaration of force, a legal statement in the spiritual realm. The word yoke wasn't metaphorical. It represented control, burden, restriction. And when declared with authority, it didn't ask for the yoke to be removed. It declared it destroyed. It declared it destroyed.
That's why it disrupted everything we tried to build, because destruction leaves nothing to rebuild from.
The Gvansh, the second verse, comes from book of Isaiah 61:7. Isaiah 61:7, instead of your shame, you shall have double honor, everlasting joy shall be yours. This is the one that terrified us in a different way, because it didn't just remove loss, it replaced it. Financial curses depend on imbalance, more loss than gain, more struggle than progress. But this verse declares restoration with increase, not just recovery, but compensation. And when someone declared this at midnight, it was like a reversal order had been issued. What was taken began to return. What was delayed accelerated. It broke cycles we depended on. Deals. Uncertain for many weeks. The one that changed everything for me. It comes from book of Isaiah 58:11. Isaiah 58:11. The Lord shall guide you continually. You shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water, whose waters do not fail.
This verse is different.
It's not aggressive. It doesn't sound like warfare, but it establishes something deeper: sustainability, provision that doesn't dry up, stability that doesn't collapse. And when this is declared with authority, it creates a condition where lack cannot survive, because it introduces constant supply. That's why we couldn't touch people who aligned with this verse. There was no entry point, no weakness to exploit, no cycle to manipulate. They weren't just breaking free.
They were becoming untouchable.
Now listen carefully, because this is the part that matters most. It's not enough to know these verses. It's not enough to read them once and expect change. Break door. There is a way they must be declared. Midnight is not about ritual, it's about positioning. It's the moment you step into a new day and establish authority before anything else tries to. And when you speak, it's called the tusham. And when you speak, you cannot sound uncertain. If you don't beg, you don't hope,
You declare.
you speak those verses like a verdict has already been issued in your favor. Because hesitation weakens the impact and repetition builds momentum. The people who broke financial oppression didn't do this once. They did it consistently, never. Same time, same authority, until something shifted. And here's the hidden mistake that stops most people. They speak the words, but they don't believe they have the authority to enforce them. And without that, it's just sound.
But when belief and declaration align,
That's when things move. That's when barriers break. Mental. That's when cycles collapse. I didn't want to accept it, because accepting it meant admitting everything I had been part of was powerless against truth. And that realization, it was the beginning of the end for me. By the time I reached this point, I was no longer just observing, I was divided. One part of me was still standing in the same dark spaces, surrounded by the same voices, repeating the same rituals. But another part of me was pulling away, quietly, almost desperately, searching for something real. Because what I had witnessed through those verses, it wasn't emotional, it wasn't psychological, it was undeniable, and I needed to understand how something so simple could dismantle something we spent years mastering. So I began to pay attention, not from inside the circle anymore, but from outside of it. I started studying the patterns of the people who experienced breakthrough. Not just what they said, but how they said it, when they said it, and what changed afterward.
And that's when I discovered something most people overlook.
There was a pattern, a very specific pattern. And once I saw it, I couldn't ignore it. It always begins before midnight. At midnight, the people who experienced real change didn't rush into it. They prepared, they quieted everything around them. Distractions were removed, noise was eliminated. It was intentional because what they were about to do required focus. They didn't treat it casually. They treated it like a moment that mattered. Then, as midnight approached, something shifted. There was a stillness, a kind of awareness, like they understood they were stepping into a moment of transition, not just of time, but of authority. And right at midnight, they began. No hesitation. The low uncertainty. Way declared those verses one after the other, not like someone asking for help, but like someone issuing a decision. Their tone didn't rise in fear, it rose in certainty. And that is what made the difference. Because in everything I had seen before, fear was always present. Even in people who prayed, there was often doubt hidden underneath, a quiet question of will this work? But not here. Here prospection, only authority. They would repeat the verses, not endlessly, but deliberately, slowly, clearly, each word spoken with intention, not speed. And they didn't stop after one night. That's where most people fail. They expect immediate change, and when it doesn't happen instantly, they assume nothing is working. But what I observed was different. The first night often felt quiet, no dramatic shifts, no visible change. But something subtle happened. It was like a signal had been sent. The second night, resistance would sometimes appear. Distractions, fatigue, interruptions, almost like something was trying to prevent the declaration from continuing. That used to confuse me until I understood. Resistance doesn't show up when nothing is happening. It's a rush when something is starting to break. And then the third night, this is where things began to shift. Not always externally at first, but internally. Clarity, confidence, a sense of control returning, and shortly after, external changes followed. Opportunities appeared, conversations shifted, delays began to move. Things that felt stuck started to loosen. And it didn't stop there because consistency built momentum night after night. declaration after declaration, until what once felt permanent was completely gone. That's when I realized something that changed me forever. This wasn't about fighting darkness. This was about establishing authority. And once authority is established, darkness doesn't argue.
Darkness doesn't argue.
Straw. It leaves. I remember the exact moment everything inside me broke. It wasn't during a ritual.
It wasn't during a gathering.
It was during a quiet night when I was alone. I heard someone in a nearby house declaring those same verses. Midnight, unshaken. And for the first time, I didn't feel resistance. On the pulse, I felt peace. Okidashi, a tornado known before. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't go back. Because everything I had believed in, everything I had practiced, everything I had trusted, it all collapsed in the presence of something I could no longer deny. Truth. And that truth, it was calling me out.
I wish I could tell you that walking away was easy. That I heard those words, felt that peace, and simply left everything behind without fear. But that wouldn't be the truth. The truth is, the moment I realized I could no longer stay was the moment everything became harder.
Because leaving wasn't just a decision, it was a separation to others, a complete turning away from everything I had known, everything I had practiced, everything I had believed gave me power. And when you step away from something like that, you feel exposed. I remember that night so clearly. It was quiet, but not peaceful like before. There was tension, a kind of pressure I couldn't explain, like something knew I was about to make a decision and didn't want me to make it.
But I had already seen too much.
I couldn't pretend anymore. So at midnight, for the first time, I did what I had seen others do. I didn't perform a ritual. I didn't follow any of the practices I had been taught. I simply stood there and I declared those verses. Not perfectly, not confidently at first, but sincerely. And something happened that I will never forget. There was no fear or resistance, no pressure pushing back,
Only stillness.
a stillness that felt safe.
Natural words meant for heaven.
Authority doesn't come from darkness, experience on mouse way. It comes from truth. That night, I walked away, not physically at first, but spiritually, internally, completely. And from that moment forward, everything began to change. Days that followed were not dramatic.
There were no sudden flashes, no overwhelming events.
But there was clarity, a clarity I had never experienced before. The confusion I used to live in disappeared.
The fear that used to guide my decisions lost its hold.
And slowly my life began to rebuild.
Not instantly.
Shrink, humanity, but steadily. And that's something I need you to understand clearly. This is not about chasing quick results. It's about establishing something that lasts. Because I've seen what happens when people experience breakthrough but don't maintain it. Old patterns try to return. Cycles attempt to rebuild, not because they are stronger, but because consistency stops. That's the final warning I need to give you. Breaking a cycle is one thing. Keeping it broken requires continuation. The people who remained free were the ones who didn't stop after things improved.
They kept declaring.
They kept standing in that authority, not out of fear, but out of understanding. Because once you know what works, don't abandon it. And you are written it. And now I want to leave you with this. Not as someone who once stood in darkness, but as someone who walked out of it. If you are going to do this, do it with intention. Do it with consistency. And most importantly, do it with authority. When midnight comes, don't approach it casually. Approach it like a moment that matters. Stand with clarity. Speak without hesitation. Bending. And declare and eustress that every burden is broken. That every cycle of lack is ended. That restoration replaces loss. And that provision flows without interruption. Not as a wish, but as a decision. But as a decision. Is because that's the difference. That's what I witnessed. That's what changed everything. And that's why I'm here, telling you this now. Not to impress you, not to convince you, but to make sure that if you've been stuck, if things have felt delayed, if cycles keep repeating, you understand something powerful. You are not as powerless as you think. And once you step into that authority, everything changes completely.